Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jonathan. This is Mr. Pearson Talks Books. I'm an elementary school teacher who typically reads middle grade stuff, so I can make recommendations to my students and their parents. But from time to time, I like to read adult books as well. And that's what we're doing today. Because today we are starting a new reading vlog about me reading the book Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I saw this book at the library. I've heard other booktubers talk about it, and I thought I would give it a try. And given that we're getting into the darker times of the year, where the sun goes down a little bit earlier, I'm kind of in the mood for something a little slow burn, a little more Gothic. And to be honest, I know very little about this book. I know that it is about a lady who marries somebody who is a widower, and she moves into his house, and his former wife, his now deceased wife, I guess is a good way to put it, continues to have a presence in the house. There is some type of psychological torment that is taking place in the new wife's life because of the widowed, or because of the wife who has passed away. And so I am looking forward to this. I know that this book was published in the 1930s, I believe, and then Alfred Hitchcock, who is known for making very suspenseful movies, turned it into a film that has been very well received. I have looked for it at our library, and for some reason, neither one of the libraries that I go to has the movie. So I haven't been able to watch the movie yet. Might be a good thing, especially if I'm going to read the book. So I'm going to read it, and I will check in from time to time to let you know what my thoughts are on the book and how my reading is progressing. All right, I'm going to get to reading, and we'll talk soon. All right, so here is my first check-in for Rebecca. I read chapters 1 through 6, and the way this book starts off with this very famous line, which says, "Last night I dreamt I went to Manderley again." And I got to tell you, that first line was pretty wild, because it kind of sets up what's going to be going on in the rest of the book. So she goes through, and in the first chapter, she's talking about this dream of a place where she wanted to go. And then when you get to the last lines of chapter 1, and it says, "We would not talk of Manderley. I would not tell my dream, for Manderley was ours no longer. Manderley was no more." So after she gives you, the narrator gives you this dream, then she tells you that Manderley, the place she was dreaming of, is no longer there. And in my head, I'm going, what in the world is she talking about? How can this happen? And then chapter 2, that kind of reverses, and she goes back to the beginning of her story. And this story, the narrator, the person telling the story, doesn't have a name. We don't really know anything about her other than she's young, and she works for a lady named Mrs. Van Hopper. And Mrs. Van Hopper she's kind of a gossip queen, I guess would be a good way to put her, would be a good way to call her, because she wants to know everything about everybody, and she's always trying to be up in everybody's business. In fact, there was one part in the book where they're staying at a hotel in Monte Carlo, and she's getting ready to complain to the owner of the hotel because there aren't enough famous people there for her. And so anyway, our narrator is working as a companion, is the job, where basically she's a maid for this lady who's a kind of a rich, snobby person from New York. And one day they're down at the restaurant, and things are not going well when a very mysterious man walks in, and Mrs. Van Hopper gets very excited because this is Maximilian de Winter. And Maximilian de Winter is the owner of the very famous estate Manderley. And so she tries to ingratiate herself to him, and it doesn't go well. In fact, it's quite embarrassing for Mrs. Van Hopper, but unfortunately, Mrs. Van Hopper she didn't understand that Mr. De Winter was being rude to her. In fact, once the encounter is over, the Mrs. Van Hopper turns to the narrator and says, you were really rude today," which was kind of funny because she didn't really say anything at all. Well, the story progresses, and Mrs. Van Hopper gets sick. She comes down with the flu, so she has to stay in bed. And while she's in bed, our narrator goes down to have lunch at the restaurant, trying to get there at a certain time in order to avoid running into Mr. De Winter. And it just happens that Mr. De Winter is also there, trying to avoid running into her. And so they end up having lunch together, strike up a conversation. They go for a drive in his car. And this begins kind of a pseudo courtship. They're spending all of their time together because Mrs. Van Hopper, thankfully, still has the flu. And once she recovers, Mrs. Van Hopper decides, you know what? I'm tired of being here. I'm going back to New York. And this puts our narrator into a bit of a tizzy because she's afraid she's never going to see Maxim De Winter again. And so she quickly runs down to see him, and thinking he'll say, "Okay, it was nice to meet you," and everything. But Maxim immediately says, "Well, this isn't probably the way you imagined it. This probably isn't as romantic as you think, but let's get married. I'll go talk to Mrs. Van Hopper right now and tell her everything." And before there's any admissions of love or anything like that, the next thing you know, the two of them are married. And there seems to be some type of something going on with Maxim De Winter that is kind of right below the surface, but nobody will really say what it is. And as the story progresses, one part that kind of stuck out. Remember, the book is called Rebecca. And one day, while our narrator is in the car, she comes across a book of poetry that says, "To Max from Rebecca." And it was a book of poetry that Rebecca, who was Maxim's first wife, who died under some mysterious circumstances, and that's why everyone is concerned about Maxim, because he seems to be depressed over the loss of his wife, understandably so. The book is there, and one day Maxim gives the book to our narrator, who decides she doesn't want Rebecca being a part of her life, so she cuts out that page and quickly throws it away. Just gets rid of it because she's trying to get rid of every aspect of Rebecca. So they end up getting married, and they go on this very short honeymoon. And I left it at the end of chapter 6, which is where they're getting ready to go back to Manderley. So I'm going to read the next few chapters. I think the next section I'm going to read is chapter 7 through 11, and I'll come back with an update and those types of things. We'll see you then. So I finished reading chapters 7 through 11 of Rebecca, and this is the section of the book where our narrator and Maxim return to Manderley, the family estate. And I got to tell you, it was a difficult section to read, primarily because of the fish out of water sense that I got from our narrator. It's very obvious that this is not the world that she grew up in, because she doesn't really understand how things are going, what things are expected of her. And it is becoming more and more apparent that all of the staff that was there at the house are very much on Team Rebecca, if you want to call it that. Nobody is being very or openly hostile to her. But nobody seems to really be going out of their way to help her out and to help her understand things. So I'll give you an example. Right after they arrived, which was a whole debacle in and of itself, because Maxim had told Mrs. Danvers, and we'll get to her in a second, that he didn't want a big show, a big to-do about them arriving. So when they finally make it up this very long driveway, all of the staff is out front waiting for them to arrive, which was very much against what Maxim had said his wishes were, which immediately put into my mind that there is some kind of conflict between Mrs. Danvers, who seems to run everything, and Maxim, who is the person who owns the home. But anyway, back to what I was saying. The first night, our narrator spent time in the library, and there was a cozy fire, and it was wonderful and everything. And then the next morning, she gets up late. She didn't realize that things happened early around there, so she missed breakfast and went into the library, and the library was freezing cold. There was no fire or anything, and so she was trying to start a fire when one of the servants came in, and she said something about there not being a fire, and the servant immediately goes, well, Miss Rebecca always went into this particular room, and we don't light a fire in the library until later in the afternoon. There's a fire in this other room if you want to go there. And so the narrator started to leave, acting as if she knew where she was going, and ended up getting lost. And so that was one of those situations. And then she meets Mrs. Danvers, and Mrs. Danvers is the lady who is in charge. And you can tell right away that she is not happy about our narrator being Mr. De Winter's new wife, that she's the new Mrs. De Winter. And it's just the way that she interacts with our narrator, the things that she says, the not so subtle hints that she drops that Rebecca was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And so life, things continue, and you can tell based on some of the interactions and the things that people say to the narrator. It feels weird to keep calling her the narrator, but she doesn't have a name. Some of the things that life at Manderley is taking a toll on her. She is purposely trying to avoid all of the staff that's there. She's probably the weirdest interaction in this particular section that I came across was when the narrator went to the west side of the house, which is where Maxim and Rebecca lived while she was alive, and everything was covered under dust sheets. So there's blankets and all of these things that are covering everything. And Mrs. Danvers catches her in that room. And she said, oh, I was just, looking around. And Mrs. Danvers goes, well, if you had told me, I would have taken care of it. All you have to do is tell me. Just tell me what you want and I'll take care of it. And she was really pushy in this interaction, which was very unsettling. It was kind of a weird vibe. Also in this section, we get to meet, I think her name is Beatrice, and that is Maxim's sister and her husband, and then the manager, I guess, I don't remember the exact title, but we get to meet him, and through their interactions, there's kind of this underlying current of they know something about Rebecca, but nobody wants to openly say it. There's some kind of secret that I haven't gotten to yet, but that's kind of bubbling right there near the surface. I said this was a slow burn book, and I'm just waiting for that, for the wick or the fuse to catch, so that I can figure out what is happening. So there's all of these different little things. There's so much in this, in chapters 7 through 11. I can't go into all of it here in this section. But it is definitely building to something about to happen. So that's where we're going to leave it for this section. I'm going to go do some more reading. I think the next chapters I'm going to read are 12 through 15, if I looked at my reading schedule correctly. And then I'll be back to let you know my thoughts on that as well. I'm doing my best to try to keep this as spoiler free as possible, and I hope that I'm doing that. But if I let a spoiler slip here or there, please forgive me. Hopefully, it won't ruin the entire experience for you. So, I'm going to go do some reading, and we'll be back with you in just a little bit. So I'm back from reading some more of Rebecca, and I was going to do a check-in after I got to chapter 15, but things really went off the rails with this book, and I just kept reading because event after event after event kept happening. Remember how I told you that this was a slow burn book and I was waiting for things to take off? Well, they took off, and they took off in a major way. Now, I'm going to try to be as careful in talking about this section as I can, because I certainly don't want to give any spoilers, but man, there was a lot packed in between chapter 12 and chapter 20 where I left it. So there's been all of this talk of a fancy dress ball. There's this big party that they used to throw at Manderley, and all of the people from the surrounding town would come to it, and everybody was really excited, and they were hoping that now that there's a new Mrs. De Winter that it would happen. And so the narrator, the new wife, she gets talked into having one of these, and she convinces her husband to do it. And so they're getting ready for it, and she doesn't know what she's gonna wear. And this is, something that's new to her. It's new. And Mrs. Danvers, I told you Mrs. Danvers is a villain. Well, she comes in and she starts dropping little hints about the dress that the narrator, our main character, should wear. And so she goes, that sounds like a really great idea. And so she gets this special dress made. It's modeled after a picture that is hanging up in the house of one of Maxim's relatives. And so she gets a special dress made, and she's wearing it, and she puts it on. She doesn't tell anybody except for Clarice, who is her maid. And she gets ready to come down to the fancy ball, and everything goes wrong. And I'm trying to be very careful in how I say this, but it turns out that wearing that dress was a huge mistake. And so everything starts to fall apart for her. She and Maxim have this huge fight, and there's lots of things that are going on that are taking place. And when Mrs. Danvers is standing up at the top of the stairs, she has this evil grin on her face, knowing that what she did was causing the problems here. And so in the midst of all of what's going on, our narrator she's thinking that her marriage is over. She's thinking that she never should have done this. Just like Ms. Van Hopper said that she was making a terrible mistake, she's getting into the mindset that she really did make a terrible mistake in doing this. And she's looking out the window, and Mrs. Danvers comes in and starts getting into her head and saying, "We never wanted you here. Why are you here? You are never going to take the place of Rebecca. She's always going to be better than you." Just all of this. And then she goes, "Hey, jump out the window. It'll be over quick." And she continues to just get into our main character's ear and convince her and push her. She's like, "I won't push you." Sorry about that. I don't know what happened, but my video stopped recording as I was going through that. So as I was saying, our main character is looking out the window, and she is contemplating jumping out, and Mrs. Danvers is right there trying to convince her to do it, when all of a sudden there are some fireworks that go off in the distance, and it snaps her out of what she was thinking. And it turns out that those fireworks are a ship that has run aground or is stuck on the reef that's just outside of Manderley in the water. And there's a boat that's out there that can't get loose. And so a diver goes down to see what the problem is. and he comes back up, and it turns out that when he comes back up from being under the water, he brings a very startling revelation with him. There is a boat at the bottom of the water there, and there is a body inside the boat. It turns out that the boat is Rebecca's boat. Now, we come to find out in the story that Rebecca drowned under very mysterious circumstances. She went out in her boat one night, and she ended up drowning, and they found her body way far away, at least according to the story. And so the harbor master comes, and he has to tell Maxim and the main character, hey, there is a boat down there. It's your wife's boat, and there is a body in there, and we have to report this. And at that point, Maxim turns to the main character. He is very, very upset. And up until this point, Maxim has seemed very distant, particularly in relation to his wife. And that's part of the reason why she was feeling like this was a mistake for me to come here. I shouldn't be here. All of these things. He thinks that his wife doesn't love him, and she thinks that he doesn't love her, that he just married her because he couldn't handle being in the house all by himself. And then we find out the real reason why Maxim has been acting the way that he has. And again, I really want to say something, but I don't want to spoil the story. But we find out in this section that Rebecca is not the wonderful hostess and wife that she led everyone to believe. That there was actually a very dark side to Rebecca, and that instead of Maxim loving Rebecca, he actually despised and hated her because of this not so secret life that she was leading. And that actually led to the tragedy of her drowning or her disappearing. And we come to find out that Maxim is responsible for it. And now they're about to have, it's going to be reported. And so Maxim and his wife, the main character, they are doing their very best to try to figure out how in the world are they going to be able to recover from this? How are they going to be able to handle this situation? And what are they going to do when the inquest or the investigation into it begins? And that's where I left it off. In fact, the chapter at the end of chapter 20, it ends with the telephone ringing. And that's where I had to stop. So that's where I'm going to pick up, find out who's on the other end of that phone, and go from there. And so I'll probably try to finish the book. I think I have about 5 or 6 more chapters. And then I will give you a recap and do my final thoughts on this book when I check in with y'all again. Okay, so I finished the last couple of chapters. I think it was chapter 20 through 27 or chapter 21 through 27. But we get to the end of the book. And again, I'm going to try to recap this and try to be as spoiler-free as possible. But that's a little bit challenging. So we just left off with Maxim relaying to his new wife that he is responsible for Rebecca's disappearance. There ends up being an inquest, which is a lot like a trial, and they have to go over the evidence and try to determine who is at fault as far as Rebecca's disappearance. And it ends up once all of the evidence had been looked at, it was determined that nobody was at fault for Rebecca's disappearance except for Rebecca, that she ended up taking her own life. Now we know that that's not true because Maxim had confessed to his new wife that he was the one who was responsible for her death. And so they think they're off of the hook, but then a former suitor of Rebecca's shows up, and he is convinced that everybody was on the take, that somehow everybody is trying to get Maxim off of the hook. And this guy, his name is Jack Favell, I believe. He was a suitor of Rebecca's, one of her lovers. And he was very much assuming that Rebecca was going to leave Maxim and come and marry him. And on the day that she died, she left a message for him saying, "I need to talk to you. There's something I need to talk to you about." And she left that note. So he came the next day only to find out that Rebecca was no longer alive. And so they're going back and forth, and he's trying to accuse Maxim of being responsible for Rebecca's demise. And the magistrate is there listening to all of the arguments. They bring in Mrs. Danvers. Remember, she's a villain. And she knows nothing about why Rebecca was in London on the day that she died. And so they go through her date book, her address book, and they find the name of a doctor. And you can't really figure out why. There's no way to contact the doctor by phone. So everybody decides to make a trip up to London to meet with this doctor. Well, it comes to find out that, and this is a bit of a spoiler, so you can skip ahead if you'd like, but come to find out that Rebecca had terminal cancer. And so she was going to die in a very short period of time. And one of the things that she had relayed to Mrs. Danvers was that if she was going to die, Rebecca was telling her this, that if she was going to die, she wanted it to be a very quick death. She didn't want to linger and become weak and those types of things. She wanted to die very quickly. And so they thank the doctor for this evidence, because it leads or lends itself even more to the fact that Rebecca died by suicide, even though Jack is still not convinced that that is the case. And so they leave him. They start to drive home, and as they are, as Maxim and his new wife are approaching Manderley, the house where they live, they notice that Manderley is on fire, and that's where the book ends. I think that's a pretty accurate recap. Like I said, I'm trying to be as spoiler-free as possible. But anyway, that is a recap of the last section of the book. I'm going to pause here, and I'll be back in just a moment or two with some final thoughts. So, final thoughts on the book Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I really enjoyed this book. It was not my typical book. If you've been following my channel, you know that I mostly read middle grade, and middle grade is safe, and middle grade doesn't have very high stakes, right? Everything ends up happy in the end, even if it's kind of scary in the middle. It ends up, it ends on a happy note at the end. Rebecca did not end that way. So as I was reading this, I was reading it as a straightforward kind of mystery thriller type book. And if you just read it that way, it's going to be a very enjoyable experience for you. It is a little strange that the narrator is never named. And Rebecca, who the book is named for, isn't even in the book. It's just her ghost. It's the thought of her throughout the book and her overbearing presence in everything. If I was to rate this book, and now because this is a classic, I have to be careful. I would probably give this 4.5 out of 5 stars. I mean, it was an excellent read. I may read it again at some point. Now, I know all of the twists now. I know how this is going to end. But one of the things that in the particular book that I had, the copy that I had, there was an afterword that was written by someone. I wonder if we read the same book, because she had a lot of insights and different things that I completely missed. Things about Maxim, things about the narrator, and things about Mrs. Danvers. Mrs. Danvers was even creepier in her interpretation than I came across. That she came across to me, and I thought she was pretty creepy. Um, so I may need to read this book again and look at it through a different light. Who should read Rebecca? Well, if you are looking for a romance book, this is not the book for you. All right, this is a dark, psychological, twisted thriller type thing, where good people look like, or the good people might be the bad guys, and the bad guys might look like the good people, I guess is a good way to say it. There are some, even the narrator doesn't necessarily come across in the best light as this book progresses, particularly when Maxim confesses his crime and the possibility of it being a double homicide. You'll have to read the book to understand that. Her immediate thought was not revulsion at the fact that her husband is a murderer, but the fact of, okay, what are we going to do to cover this up to keep from getting in trouble for it? Like that's some, I understand loyalty to a spouse. I would do anything for my wife, but that's pretty dark, particularly given the circumstances there. So, Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Like I said, it was a little out of my typical reading. I read middle grade, I read some fantasy, I read Star Wars. This was a little bit outside of it. It was an enjoyable experience. It was a book that when I put it down, I continued to think about it after I put it down, to the fact that I was actually having some pretty weird dreams because of this book. But I highly encourage you, if you have not read it, to pick it up and give it a try. I mean, at least read the first, 6 chapters where our narrator is meeting Maxim and where they are in Monte Carlo on their whirlwind courtship, I guess, not knowing it was a courtship. But give those chapters a try, see how you feel. That'll give you a good feel for the rest of the novel, because if you can get through the creepiness and unsettling nature of their early relationship, you'll be able to make it through the rest. So, Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Have you read it, and what are your thoughts? Leave those down in the comments for me. And if you know of another book that is similar that you think that I might be interested in reading, please leave that title and author down in the comments as well. Also, since this is the first type of video like this that I've made, I'd like to know what your thoughts are. If you made it all the way to the end, let me know your thoughts on this style for me, and what I can do to improve those. And as always, my name is Jonathan. This is Mr. Pearson Talks Books. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time.